Imagine a single continent being pulled in two completely different directions all at once. Well, that was pretty much the reality in Europe back in January of 1986. In just 1 month, you can see the blueprint for a high-tech, unified continent being drawn up. But at the exact same time, individual countries were going through these incredibly powerful and very local cultural moments. It's like this 1 month is a perfect snapshot of the forces that are still shaping Europe today.
So you gotta ask, what exactly was Europe in January 1986? Was it all about the glamour of Milan and the promise of super-fast trains? Or was it more about a nation's grief in France and the edgy pop music coming out of Germany? The wild thing is, the answer is all of the above, and we're gonna unpack that puzzle. Maybe the best way to really get a feel for this is to just listen. Back in 1986, Europe didn't have one single soundtrack. Nah, it had a whole collection of them, and each one tells you something completely different about the national mood. So the first thing that really jumps out at you here is how little these charts had in common. You see, while the US and the UK often shared hit songs, continental Europe was all about its own homegrown superstars. And that created these totally different atmospheres. You had somber grief in France, this kind of edgy fascination in West Germany, pure energy and optimism in Italy, and then just total euphoria in Spain. Each country was, quite literally, dancing to its own beat.
Okay, let's start in France because the month took a really dramatic and tragic turn there. On January 14th, the whole country was just stunned. Daniel Balavoine, a massively popular singer and activist, died in a helicopter crash during the Paris-Dakar rally. And in the aftermath of his death, his song La Ziza, which was this incredibly powerful anthem against racism, it just shot straight to #1. It stopped being just a pop song, you know? It became the soundtrack for an entire nation's collective grief, capturing the social conscience of that exact moment. Meanwhile, just across the border in West Germany, the vibe was, well, it was completely different. The charts there were dominated by an Austrian artist, Felko, with a song that was dark, atmospheric, and really, really controversial. So, get this. While France is grieving, the German-speaking world is completely captivated by this cinematic, kind of creepy story song. The craziest part? Some radio stations actually banned it for being too dark, which of course only made everybody want to listen to it more. It's such a stark contrast to what was happening right next door. All right, let's head south to Italy, and boom, the mood flips again. This was the absolute peak of Italo disco, a sound that was pure electronic energy and uniquely Italian. The country was in the middle of this massive economic boom, and you can hear that supreme confidence in the music from local acts and rising stars like Eros Ramazzotti. And then you have Spain. If Italy was energetic, Spain was just euphoric. You have to remember, they had just joined the European Economic Community. The country was exploding with a cultural freedom they called La Movida, this huge release after decades of dictatorship. And the synth pop from bands like Mecano, that was the optimistic soundtrack for a brand new democratic Spain, finally looking toward the future. But here's the thing. All of this, the music, the grief, the celebration, it wasn't happening in a bubble. While people were living their lives, these huge geopolitical and engineering plans were clicking into place. And get this for timing. On the very same day that France was mourning its pop star, a deal was signed that would physically change the map of Europe forever. And that brings us to the other side of the story, right? This massive, ambitious, high-tech dream of a truly united continent. And these weren't just vague ideas. These were concrete blueprints for a shared European future. The month kicked off with a truly monumental event. Spain and Portugal officially joined the EEC. It was known as the Mediterranean expansion, but honestly, it was about so much more than economics. It was about welcoming two young democracies into the club, and by doing that, shifting the whole political center of Europe southward. And if you want the perfect example of the different ways countries were thinking about this unified future, look no further than the Channel Tunnel. For France, this was a classic grand travail, a grand public work, to build a high-speed European hub. But for Britain, under Margaret Thatcher's push for privatization, a totally different story. It was a more cautious, privately funded project, with all these lingering worries about losing its island's security. For French President Mitterrand, this wasn't just about concrete and steel. No, this was about history. He actually framed the project as fulfilling a dream that Napoleon himself had way back in 1802. For France, this was destiny. It was a grand statement about their central role in a modern Europe. And what was at the heart of this French vision? One word:
Speed. 300 kilometers per hour. That was the planned speed for the French TGV train that was going to connect to the channel. The ambition here was staggering, to literally shrink the continent, making a trip from Paris to London a journey of just a few hours. And this ambition wasn't just stuck on the ground either. The entire continent was also looking up at the skies with a real sense of pride. The European Space Agency's Giotto mission was on its way to fly by Halley's Comet, and it was another powerful symbol of high-tech cooperation, proving Europe could compete on the world scientific stage. So, you've got these two massive forces at play, the intensely local cultures and the grand continental ambitions. Well, in January 1986, you can actually see them starting to merge, as culture itself began to get more polished, more technological. I mean, just think about the Minitel in France. This is wild. Long before most of the world had even heard of the internet, millions of French homes had these little terminals. They were already living a version of the online future, booking train tickets, using early chat rooms, all from their living rooms. It was a national tech project that actually changed daily life. Over in Italy, the actual look of 1986 was being created in Milan. You had the famous power suit from designers like Armani and Versace, which perfectly captured the economic confidence of a period they called Il Sorpasso, the overtaking, when Italy's economy was just booming. This was the look of bold, global ambition. You could even see this tension playing out at the movies. Sure, Hollywood blockbusters were everywhere and they were hugely popular, but you also had these legendary European directors like Federico Fellini who were basically pushing back, making art that questioned this new commercial world. His film Ginger and Fred, which came out that very month, was a direct jab at the rise of shallow TV culture. So, what does this all add up to? When you look back at January 1986, you really do see a perfect snapshot of the two souls that have always defined and still define modern Europe. This single month shows a continent being pulled in two directions at once. On one side, you have the deeply personal local cultures, the morning in France, the synth-pop celebration in Spain. And at the exact same time, you have the grand unifying dream of channel tunnels, open borders, and a shared high-tech destiny. And that leaves us with a final thought. This balancing act between building a shared future while respecting all these unique, powerful pasts, that was the central story of January 1986. The real question is, all these years later, does that exact same challenge still lie at the very heart of what it means to be Europe?